Get yourselves comfortable. What I plan to do in the 4 sessions that I have this term is look at a few greatest hits from the first book of the Bible, the book of Genesis. So tonight, we're going to start with our ancestor in the faith, Abraham. And this is where Abraham's story begins, Genesis chapter 12. Now the Lord said to Abram, his name isn't Abraham yet, God's going to change his name later. The Lord said to Abram, get out of your country, from your kindred and from your father's house, to a land that I will show you. I will make you a great nation, I will bless you, and make your name great, and you shall be a blessing. I will bless those who bless you, and curse those who curse you, and in you all the families of nations will bless themselves. Then Abraham departed, as the Lord said to him, and Lot, that's his nephew, went with him. Now Abram was 75 years old when he departed from Haran. Haran is kind of on the border between modern Turkey and modern Syria. It's a rough place to be right now. I've actually been there. So Abram took Sarai, his wife. Later she's going to be Sarah. She's not Sarah yet. Abram took Sarai, his wife, and Lot, his brother's son, and all their possessions, and every soul they had acquired in Haran. Got to imagine not a little nuclear family like your family, mom, dad, brothers, and sisters, but a huge extended family of aunts and uncles, cousins, servants, etc. That's the souls. And every soul they had acquired in Haran, and they departed for the land of Canaan. That means they're going southwest into what's now Israel. Also not a very safe place to be right now. Thus they came to the land of Canaan. And Abram passed through the land to the place of Shechem. That's about a 3-hour drive north of Jerusalem. And the Canaanites were in the land. The indigenous, original peoples, if you will, of the land of Israel. Abram passed through the land to the place of Shechem as far as the oak of Moreh. We'll see more about that later. And the Canaanites were then in the land. Then the Lord appeared to Abram and said, to your seed, that means to your descendants, but it's perhaps important that the word that's used in the Bible is in the singular. To your seed, to everyone who's going to be descended from Abraham, I give this land. And there Abram built an altar to the Lord who had appeared to him. So he moved from there to the mountain east of Bethel. He's still going south. And he pitched his tent with Bethel on the west and Ai on the east. And there he built an altar to the Lord and called on the name of the Lord. Then Abram journeyed, going still toward the south. He hasn't gotten as far as Jerusalem yet. In one sense, this guy couldn't be less like you and me. It's the 18th century BC. They haven't figured out how to work with iron yet. They can work in bronze, they can do tin, they can do copper, but not yet iron. That means they don't have tools that are strong enough to cut stone, which means if they build things, they're building them out of mud. But Abraham doesn't live in a building anyway. Abram and all of his people, they're nomads. They're traveling. Because on this landscape, there's a little city here, there's a little city there, there's a little city there, usually around a stable body of water. But mostly it's open land, and these big extended families are kind of moving from one place to another to graze their animals. What are their animals? Sheep, and my favorite animal of all, donkeys. That's what they're raising. So Abram has already gone in chapter 11 from the middle of Iraq to the Turkish-Syrian border. Now he's come down about halfway down the land of Israel. And it's pretty clear that Abram is not a poor guy. He's got a lot of possessions. So far, this has been pretty good for him. And so he does what nomads do. He just moves through the land, grazing his animals, and continuing to prosper. Not like your life or mine. Or is it? This story begins with the Lord telling Abram, think up, change your whole life, go somewhere else. And every one of you who is a student at this university has done that within the past 4, 5, 6 years, right? There was a process by which you decided to take the next step, and you decided the next step was here. Those of you who are in high school, what are you, 2, 3 years away from making that same decision, huh? You're going to have to decide where you go next. You're going to have to decide what you do next, what you're going to study. What you're going to study turns into what you're going to do as a profession. How are you going to become prosperous like Abraham? Because you do want to be prosperous, right? Yeah, sure. Why not? Abram already has a wife and family. There's another thing that within the next 5 or 10 years, all of you are going to make some decisions about, probably. Scary to think of it, but if you're 15 years old, within the next 10 years, you probably will have made all of the decisions that will determine the general shape of your life. I don't mean to scare you, but that's true. And the Bible makes it look so easy. God says to Abram, hey, just move. And Abram doesn't even say, okay. He just picks up and goes. How did Abram know it was the Lord? And why was he even listening to the Lord? This is a time where every 2 blocks there's another god or goddess. Somehow Abram had come to believe in one God. That was happening in that world in various places. His relatives probably believed in a moon goddess. Somehow Abram had come to recognize the Lord. And the Bible here uses, hiding behind this word Lord, is the proper name that God reveals. God's personal name. And so somehow it has to be in the quiet of his own mind and heart, in that experience that you and I would call prayer or thought. What's the difference between prayer and thought? Thought is when I talk to myself. Prayer is when I talk to God. When politicians say they're sending out thoughts and prayers, they make it very clear they have no idea what they're talking about. We know better. So Abram steps out, kind of trusting. And so have you, if you came here. So will you as you take your next step. But trusting in what? Is it just going to be your own gut? My gut just tells me when I'm hungry. Is it going to be what somebody else tells you? AI is the way of the future. Do AI, you'll be rich. Or is it going to be the result of a conversation with the Lord? He cares about you. He cares what you do for a living. He cares who you marry. He cares about your family. He cares about how you raise your kids. He cares about the shape of your life on this earth that He created good for you and me. Because notice so far, God doesn't ask anything of Abram. Huh? And God promises him amazing prosperity. He tells this nomad who doesn't own any real estate at all, I'm going to give you all this land. All of it will belong to your descendants. And I'm going to make you so rich and famous and powerful that all the families of the earth are going to use your name as a blessing. You should be rich like Abram. You should be happy like Abram. You should be prosperous like Abram. That's what the text means. In you, all the families of the earth shall bless themselves. I will bless those who bless you and curse those who curse you. You're so important to me that I will extend my love for you to the people who love you. And I will withhold my blessing from the people that don't treat you the way you should be treated. That's what God's saying to Abram. That's a complicated way of saying to Abram, I am going to be on your side. And so far, Abram isn't asked to do anything in return. Oh, he will be. Oh, he certainly will be. But what's the only response Abram makes? Two things. Twice as he's walking through the promised land, I'm probably driving this camera crazy. As he's walking through the promised land, Abram stops and builds an altar. Now, what do you do on an altar? In this world, you offer a sacrifice. So Abram takes some of those precious sheep, or maybe some of the wheat or some of the wine, not that he's grown it, but he's bought it, and he offers that to the Lord. And what does a sacrifice do? A sacrifice says, God, I know everything I have comes from you, and I'm going to give some of it back to you as a way of saying thank you, and as a way of saying, I trust you, who gave me everything already, will give me what I need. So I can afford to be generous. I can give some back to you. A sacrifice says, I trust God so much, I can afford to give away, to be generous, even to waste. The way the world understands waste. The opposite of hoarding, keeping it all for myself. I can afford to be generous to other people in charity and to God in sacrifice. The first thing Abram does is build an altar. And where Abram builds altars, what happens? Those become holy places. Later in the Bible, those will be shrines. Before there's a temple in Jerusalem, those will be places where other people go and offer sacrifices. First at Shechem, and then at Bethel. Both of those will become shrines until King Solomon builds the temple 800 years later than this. What's the second thing Abram does? The text says he calls on the name of the Lord. That means he prays not to whoever or whatever, not to the man upstairs, not to the universe, but calls God by his proper name, the Lord. In the Hebrew of the Bible, that's written as 4 letters that in English would be YHWH. We don't know how to say them. He did. And that's the name God reveals to him. That's the name he calls God by. Think of a crowd of people out there on the street. They're nobody to you, unless you notice a friend in that crowd. And you can call out your friend's name, and your friend's going to perk up her ears and look for you. That's what's going on between Abram and the Lord. This is the beginning of a journey in which we will slowly begin to see what faith looks like. Faith is everything Father Michael said. It's knowing who God really is. It's the opposite of the great whatever. But faith is also a trusting relationship that allows me to put myself in someone else's hands. I can do that trust because I know that person. I know that person because he's revealed himself to me in the Scriptures. We're watching that begin to happen for Abram. And each of us is in our own journey and has reached a certain point in our own lives where we know who the Lord is and we know how the Lord has been for us up until now. There's way more he can show us. There's way more to learn. And so the story of Abram begins with a journey and a little bit of trust, and there's more to come. To God be the glory.
Amen.